Yes, so you are all waiting for the update on the Michelle Troconis trial. What has been going on? It's been going already 26 days, and what has really been happening? Has there been anything significant going on? And again, like I've always said when I'm discussing the Michelle Troconis trial, it's been difficult because there has not been any opening statements. There's been no roadmap, and especially in a case like this, which is so complicated, and it's a conspiracy. No one's arguing that Michelle Troconis actually committed the murder herself. So when you have a conspiracy, there's going to be so many days of trial, so many different experts, so many different pieces of evidence coming in, exhibits, testimony. It would really have been helpful to have an opening statement in this case, but we didn't have it. Connecticut doesn't require it. We spoke about that in a previous video. If you haven't seen that, definitely go check that out. And by the way, if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like this video. We are going to be bringing you trial analysis like you don't get anywhere else. So please help the channel out, subscribe, like, and we'll be able to continue bringing you this analysis. So there's been no opening statements. There's been a lot of testimony. We're trying to put the pieces together. And over this time, the state has rested. So the state rested their case. The defense made a motion for a directed verdict. We're going to get into that. We're going to discuss some of the arguments that were made back and forth regarding that. But that's really when you start to see all of the picture come together and what type of arguments the state is going to be making in their closing arguments to the jury and what type of arguments the defense is going to be making back. So finally, things are starting to take a picture, and closing arguments are either going to happen tomorrow or on Monday. The judge already notified everyone that the defense intends and is anticipated to rest their case on Friday, tomorrow, and that he didn't tell us about closing arguments yet. Now, there does have to be a contempt hearing, which is going to be held, and that has to do with some perhaps inappropriate or improper contact, perhaps with the defense's side, maybe Michelle Troconis' mother. We're going to see more about that during the contempt hearing if that's open to the public. So there does have to have a contempt hearing, so it could be that's going to happen on Friday, but we don't know yet. So we'll see either tomorrow the closing arguments are going to happen on Friday or it's going to happen on Monday. Before we jump into the Michelle Troconis trial, just to further update you on the Adam Montgomery trial, which just concluded, the verdict came back guilty. And if you'd like to see the analysis on that and why the jury probably came back with a guilty verdict, you can check out my video that I did on before the verdict actually was reached, for all the reasons why I thought that it's very likely that there will be a guilty verdict in that case. So that's just taking care of that business. And also, just one other thing that you should know is the Alec Baldwin, the Hannah Goodery's trial that just started. Also, we're going to be following that as well, bringing you some updates on that and some analysis as well. So that just happened today. We'll catch up on that, and we'll bring you analysis on that as well. So let's catch you up on the Michelle Troconis trial. So what do we have going here? Oh, before we jump into just one more little nugget, and that is that some people have been finding this defense attorney for Michelle Troconis maybe a little bit of annoying with his objections. It seems like people are not enjoying him so much. But I got to tell you, as a lawyer watching this trial, I actually seems to me that he did a good job advocating for his client. He seems to be very well read in the rules of evidence, the relevant case law, and listening to the arguments has been enjoyable for me. And also, by the way, and I don't want you to think that I don't believe the state is equally as talented. The state also, the attorneys that are representing the state in this case also seem to be a worthy adversary, or shall I say, for the defense attorney in this case. They also seem to be very well read, and it's always enjoyable to watch two attorneys who really know the rules of evidence, really know the relevant case law, to get up and argue specific issues. And we've taken apart some of the arguments that they've made. If you haven't seen some of those videos, go check that out, because really there's a lot to unpack just with the legal arguments. I didn't jump into every single one, but there's certainly, if you are wanting to learn and have an education about the rules of evidence, certain case law, arguments that can be made during trial, definitely the arguments that were made between the attorneys in this case, I thought were very interesting, very educational. And if you're someone who wants to learn about trials, this would be a good trial. You know, again, the presentation of evidence and testimony was a little boring and tiresome, but the actual arguments that were made, most of the time not in the presence of the jury, arguing over legal matters, what I thought was very interesting. And really, you can do a deep dive and spend a lot of time on analyzing that. We did a little bit of that. Check out those videos. But I just wanted to make a point, because I think that both of these attorneys did a very good job, and they're very knowledgeable. To me, it seems that way, and I think they're both doing a great job of advocacy for their clients. So let's move on to giving you the update for Michelle Troconis. So we've got the family attorney for Fotis Dulis who testified. He was called by the state. And let's remember that there was a timeline that was found, which Michelle Troconis apparently wrote. And that certainly looks like she's trying to create an alibi for herself. Seems like she was trying to create an alibi for where she was at certain times during the date when Jennifer went missing. And it certainly looks bad. Looks certainly like consciousness of guilt. And what's she creating an alibi for? Well, we've already heard from the defense that their argument on that is going to be that the family attorney, I mean Fotis's divorce attorney, told him to write a timeline. And therefore Fotis went and told Michelle that. And he also told Pavel that. Pavel testified to that as well, that he was told to write a timeline. So you've got that argument that she was just listening to Fotis to write that timeline. So that's going to be the argument. So now it's interesting to have the attorney actually get on the stand and talk about it. So this question was asked of the attorney. The question was, did you tell Fotis to make a timeline? And did you tell him to tell Michelle to make a timeline? And the answer that he gave to that question was that he didn't directly tell Fotis to make a timeline of where he was during Jennifer's disappearance. He asked him questions about where he was. And he asked him if he had an alibi for where he was. And that kind of put the seeds in Fotis's mind to make a timeline, and therefore he went and told Michelle to do that. So is that going to be enough to convince the jury that she really wasn't creating an alibi because she's really guilty and she was just listening to Fotis? It's not as clear as though the attorney specifically told Fotis, make a timeline. He didn't. That wasn't his testimony. His testimony was just that he just asked Fotis, where were you? Do you have an alibi at certain times? So, is that going to actually win the day for Michelle Troconis? We're going to have to find that out. All right, so we had him. He also did testify that in May 2019, actually the communication between Fotis and Jennifer was better. And this is going to be also a theory that the defense already has made in this case, that it kind of takes away the motive for Fotis to commit this murder. It seems pretty clear that Fotis did commit this murder, but if you can take away some of the motive and some of the intent, some of the malice that Fotis could have had towards Jennifer, then that can also translate into less of a reason for Michelle to be involved. So that's probably why they're making a case of that. Then the defense very clearly wants to make a point, and some of their witnesses that they also called to testify also testified to the same idea, that things seem to have been getting a little bit better in May 2019 between Fotis and Jennifer, and actually Fotis was a little bit more optimistic about the custody situation, that it was going to improve. So if Fotis is actually getting more optimistic about the custody, then that would be less of a reason for him to try to commit this murder, and also less of a stress on Michelle for her to go be involved and to conspire with Fotis to commit this murder. So that was in terms of the attorney for Fotis. All right. Then a lot of the days of trial were taken up by the interviews that Michelle gave. And remember, she gave 3 different interviews, and they're very difficult to listen to. And she speaks with an accent, and the recording is not that great. And it's hard to actually sit through that entire interview. And which is why probably the prosecutor stopped the video every once in a while to make a point with the detective who was conducting the interview with Michelle, asking him about, did she just say this? And did she say that before, or different things like that? So what was significant about the 3rd interview, we've already discussed the 1st and 2nd interview in previous videos. You can check that out. But in the 3rd interview, that's when things really started to unravel for Michelle, because it seemed during that 3rd interview that she started to change her story in a number of different ways. So first of all, they started off the 3rd interview saying, you were not being 100% honest with us during the first 2 interviews, and we know that. And they got her to admit that she was not being honest and truthful in her first 2 interviews. And of course, why is she not being honest? Why is she trying to hide things? If she's not involved, then why is she trying to hide things? Just be open, be transparent, be truthful. So that's going to be a very strong point by the prosecutor. Certainly, we're going to see that probably in their closing, that why is she so untruthful during her interviews? So let me just point out some of the things that she was not truthful about. So, for example, one of the things that she said in her first 2 interviews is that when she woke up that morning, Friday morning, she said that Fotis was there, and Fotis actually took a shower with her. And in the 3rd interview, she admitted that no, he was not there, and he did not take a shower with her. Now, she did stick to the story that they still did have lunch between sometime in 12 and 1:30. And here's another point. Another point is that she said that before, in her first 2 interviews, she said that she did not see Fotis' cell phone anywhere near in the house. In his office, she didn't know where his cell phone was. And in the 3rd interview, she said that no, she did see the cell phone. The cell phone was in his office, and she actually answered the cell phone when it was called. It was called, and she answered that cell phone. She did not say those pieces of information before. In fact, she said that she did not see the cell phone or anything like that. She also said that she brought sponges, bags, and gloves to 80 Mountain Spring. These were some of the materials that were recovered, that were thrown down the sewer. As we'll remember, those videos of Fotis going throughout town disposing of garbage bags, and some of the things that were found in the bags were sponges, bags, gloves, and paper towel, which she admitted bringing to 80 Mountain Spring. Now, of course, the story that she was saying is that 80 Mountain Spring was a vacant home that Fotis was trying to sell, and there was a showing, and she actually went there to clean up, to help clean up and get it ready for a showing. And there's been also testimony that Michelle really never got involved with cleaning up preparing a residence for a showing. So all of a sudden, she's bringing all these materials to clean up a residence. So that was the question there. She also mentioned in her 3rd interview that Pavel's Toyota Tacoma was at 80 Mountain Spring. And she did not say that in her first 2 interviews. She also said that Fotis gave her a paper towel that was brown in color. What was that brown for? Was it from blood that dried and looks brown now? Or was it from coffee spills or coffee stain or something? That wasn't clear, but she now admitted that she did throw out this paper towel that Fotis gave her that did have some brownish color in it. Now, during the first 2 interviews, she also said that she nothing to do with the car wash. Remember that Fotis did take this Toyota Tacoma. He was driving around this Toyota Tacoma, and during Pavel's one of his property managers, his testimony, he said that really that Fotis was not supposed to drive his car at all, and yet Fotis did take the liberty to drive his Toyota Tacoma all over the place, and he got it cleaned. He went to a car wash and got it detailed. So not only the outside of the car was washed, but even the inside was washed. And there's been testimony that shampoo and things like that can destroy DNA. So what's he doing that for? And she didn't say anything about the car wash. And then finally, in the interviews, she said that, yes, she did go to the car wash to pick up Fotis. And she was not driving with him in the Toyota Tacoma, but she did either was called or maybe she actually went in tandem with him to the car wash to pick him up from the car wash. Okay, and then there were some other things. Some other interesting things that she also mentioned in her 3rd interview, which, again, did not correlate with what she said in her first 2 interviews. So they're bringing a lot of that out. The state was bringing a lot of those pieces of information out to show that Michelle was not being honest with them because she's trying to hide something. And what would she be trying to hide? Her involvement, or Fotis' involvement, and because really she's really part of this conspiracy to commit the murder. So essentially, that's essentially where the state rested, and then there was a motion for a directed verdict. And I thought that this is very interesting. You can go back and watch. It's about 25, 30 minutes long of this motion for a directed verdict where the defense, and this happens in every single case, criminal, civil, after the state or the plaintiff finishes their presentation of the evidence, the defense gets up and says that the plaintiff or the prosecution in this case did not even prove their case, did not prove a prima facie case for what they need to prove. So That was the defense made a motion for direct verdict. Now, some of the arguments that he made were the following. He said that they'll concede that Jennifer Dulis was murdered, and that Fotis carried out the murder, caused the murder. But he said there's been no evidence that there was malice aforethought, meaning there was no planning by Fotis. There's been no evidence that Fotis planned the murder of Jennifer. Even if you can say that, yes, Fotis' DNA is all over the place and it looks like he did murder her, but we don't know what the cause of that was. Was that an argument that they got into? Was that something that just happened that just happened by mistake? We don't know. So his argument was that they're charging her. And what's required here is that to prove that there was a murder performed, a murder with malice aforethought, with an intentional murder, and that the defense argues that there's been no evidence, and therefore the jury cannot come to that conclusion, and therefore it shouldn't even go to the jury, the question of whether Michelle was part of this murder, because there's been no evidence that there was actually an intentional murder. Maybe there was some other type of killing, but not a murder. And because they charged it as a murder, a conspiracy to commit murder, so he argued that charge should be dismissed. And then he also spoke about the conspiracy that even if you say that Fotis actually did intend to commit this murder, then we have to now question, has there been any evidence that can get to the jury for them to reasonably conclude that Michelle was part of the conspiracy? Now, here's where you have to get to the elements of what the conspiracy is. So what are the elements for the conspiracy to commit murder? So number one, in order for Michelle to be found guilty, she has to have intended, she herself, not Fotis, but she herself also had to have intended that Jennifer Dulis be murdered. That's number one. Number two, that there was an agreement between Michelle and Fotis or other people to perform that murder. So that's number two. Number three is that she has to do an overt act in pursuance of that agreement. So those are the three elements. And a point that the defense made here is that the mere presence of Michelle being around Fotis when he was running around town and when he was dropping things in garbage bags, things like that, that's not an act that Michelle performed. And we don't know, and there's no evidence either that there was an agreement between Michelle and Fotis. And where's the intent that she wanted Jennifer murdered? And then he also spoke about something called Pinkerton liability. And we're not going to get into the entire case, but the Pinkerton liability goes like this. If, let's say, you're in a conspiracy to commit one crime. So, for example, let's say you want to rob a bank and you conspire with a few people and your role is to drive the car. So you're going to drive the car, your friend's going to get out of the car, rob the bank. And during the commission, you have no intention as the driver, you didn't even discuss this, that you might have to murder anybody. You never discussed that. But you did conspire to rob a bank. Now, if, let's say, in the act of robbing the bank, you go and your partner, your friend, your co-conspirator ends up murdering somebody, can then you as the driver be found also to be liable for that murder? Can you be charged with that murder? And Pinkerton liability says yes. And the reason is that when you're committing a crime of robbing a bank, it's foreseeable that may entail murdering somebody, and that may entail other acts of a crime that you didn't think about before. But if it's foreseeable that this type of crime could arise from what you're doing, even though the conspiracy wasn't specifically for that crime, so then you could be charged with that. So another argument that the defense made is that even if you want to try to somehow claim that there's Pinkerton liability here, but the problem here is that he's saying that Michelle really there's been no evidence that she was involved in any sort of conspiracy at all. So to say that, well, Pinkerton liability says that, well, therefore, if Fotis ended up murdering Jennifer, then therefore it should attach to Michelle. He's arguing that it's not foreseeable, even if you want to argue that somehow Michelle was involved in something, but still murder would not be a foreseeable outcome for whatever small amount that she was possibly involved in. So that was essentially the defense's argument in a nutshell. And the response was the following. And this is the first thing that the prosecutor said was the standard, which is always important to remind the court what the standard here is. That's always important. And the standard for directed verdict or a judgment of acquittal or a motion to dismiss in the middle of a trial is very, very high. It's that you have to take all reasonable inferences from the testimony, from the evidence that was presented. You have to take all of those inferences in light of the non-moving party. So here, the non-moving party means the state here. The state is the one that's charging. They're the one that's required to prove their case. And at this point of the trial, for a motion after the conclusion of the state's case, then if you can take all of the inferences, even if there's a lot of reasons to doubt this, but if there could be a reasonable inference pointing to the state's case, pointing to that Michelle was involved, so then the judge has to disregard all of the other inferences that could be made. And his argument, part of the state's argument here, was that these are all very nice arguments that the defense could make and can make during closing arguments, but as long as you can reasonably infer from the evidence that was presented that Michelle was involved in the conspiracy, then the case has to go to the jury. And this is what the response was in a nutshell as well. So you've got the intentional. So remember, the first argument that the defense made was that Fotis, even if you can prove from the evidence that Fotis actually committed the murder, but where's the intent? Where do you see any form of intent that Fotis actually planned this murder of Jennifer? And it wasn't just from a fight, or it wasn't from an accident. Well, the argument there was that, what's he doing in her house? What's he doing in the house, number one? Number two, there's been evidence that there was 2 blows to Jennifer in the garage to kill her. And they were going through a very contentious divorce. Now, of course, there has been some testimony saying that things were getting better, but there's also been evidence that it was a very contentious divorce. So taking a reasonable inference from the contentious divorce and the custody battle, you can certainly infer from that Fotis had evil intent towards Jennifer, certainly a motive. And if you create a motive for Fotis, that will also translate into intent. So therefore, there's certainly a motive. Now, that's what he argued in terms of Fotis. But what about Michelle? Where is Michelle's intent? Remember, that's one of the requirements. That's one of the elements for a conspiracy. Well, the intent there was that, number one, there's been evidence that this was ruining her relationship. This came out in a number of her interviews, that this whole situation, this whole custody battle and divorce, this contentious divorce that Fotis was going through with Jennifer was ruining her relationship with Fotis. It was ruining Michelle's relationship with Fotis. And she couldn't be around when he had custody of the kids. She was not allowed to be around. So even when he had custody, she had to disappear. That's annoying. That's frustrating. She also acknowledged that this was 2 years of torture for her. Going through this whole divorce, being Fotis' girlfriend during this whole divorce, she acknowledged and said in her interview that this was 2 years of torture. And she also made some comments about how that BITCH should be buried next to the dog. And she also made a comment of that, whenever she shows up, I'm going to kill her because she's making my life so terrible. And although the defense will argue, well, if she's saying that after the disappearance, doesn't that show that she doesn't even know what happened to her? Because if she knew that she was killed, then she wouldn't say, when she shows up, she's going to kill her. But that could also be part of the play here, that she's just saying that even though she knows. But again, she is saying what her mind is, and certainly to create a motive, which would also, a reasonable inference can be that she also intended on Jennifer being murdered. Also, the fact that she lied about answering his phone. And that's a significant part because that could be an alibi for Fotis. The fact that he left his phone at home when he went to go seemingly murder Jennifer, he left his phone at home and seemed that he made up with somebody, arranged for somebody to call the phone and for Michelle to answer the phone to show that really he was at home at the time and to pretend that Michelle didn't answer that phone so that it will give him an alibi to say that he was at the house when this murder was taking place. That also could show that Michelle was really involved in this. What are you answering his phone for if you're not part of this conspiracy? So that's a reasonable inference as well. Also, the fact that she lied about his whereabouts that morning. First, she said that he was home, that he jumped into the shower with her, and then later she took that back and said that he was not home. What are you saying that for? The reasonable inference from that could be that you're involved in the conspiracy. Also, an interesting theory that we're going to most likely hear about again during closing arguments is that even when you look at that video of Fotis driving around town, dropping off garbage bags into different garbage receptacles and into the sewer, you also find that the only thing that you find from her doing is that she opened the door one time and looks like she bent down to the sidewalk. And it looks like she's putting something there, which I believe she said that she was throwing out her gum. She was putting her gum down on the sidewalk. But another reasonable inference could be that there was a car there and she was actually opening her door to block the view so that when Fotis is throwing things down the sewer, who's ever outside is not going to see him do that. That was an interesting theory, and that could also be a reasonable inference that she was also complicit and part of this conspiracy. Also, this whole situation of the car wash. And initially she said that she had nothing to do with the car wash, and then eventually she said, well, he called her to tell her to pick him up from the car wash, and then later she said that actually they drove in tandem to the car wash. So you see that there's some connection between her and the car wash, which would be, again, why are you going to the car wash to clean this car, which seems to have Jennifer's DNA all over the place and bloods, things like that. So that also shows that she was, a reasonable inference can be made that she was part and complicit with this conspiracy. So after this argument was made, the judge, like happens in most cases, denied the directed verdict, denied the motion for acquittal, and the case continued. And that's when the defense called some of their witnesses. And let's talk about some of their witnesses. So some of the witnesses, one of the witnesses he actually wanted to get in was, he had, people just to talk about how Fotis was up in spirits and he was happy around the time. He wasn't like in this despondent, depressed, stressed out mood right around the time of Jennifer. You would think that if someone's about to commit a murder, he'd be very down in the dumps, very depressed. And they brought some testimony from the person who owned the ski. There's a ski club in Connecticut, and they brought him in to say that he was friends with Fotis. They had a party recently right before the murder and everything was fine. Fotis looked happy. Michelle looked happy. Everybody looked comfortable and happy and doesn't look like they're about to commit a murder. And then there was a question about whether I can't say this, whether when Fotis harmed himself, when Fotis decided to harm himself instead of stand trial, he wrote a note. And the defense really wanted to get that note into evidence. And this is another area where it's interesting to watch how this piece of evidence is going to be how they're going to try to get this piece of evidence in and what the arguments are going to be back and forth. And here, the problem with this note that Fotis left when he harmed himself, the problem with it is that it's really hearsay. And Fotis is not a defendant in this case. It's Michelle Troconis. So it's textbook hearsay. So how are you going to get that note in? Well, we spoke about this in some of our previous videos, that there's a residual hearsay exception. There's a number of different exceptions to the hearsay rule. One of the exceptions is called the residual hearsay exception. And that is if there's other indicia, if there's other reasons that the trustworthiness and the reliability of that statement, to show that statement is reliable and is trustworthy, if there's other indicia of that, then it could be admitted over a hearsay objection. It's one of the hearsay exceptions. And we spoke about that. And therefore, one of the arguments that the defense made was that it should come in under that exception because it was found next to Fotis. It was found next to Fotis when Fotis harmed himself. So that should show that it's reliable, that this was actually said and he actually wrote it, and it should come in. So that was one of the reasons. And the judge started talking about a different exception, which is the dying declaration hearsay exception. And the dying declaration hearsay is that if someone's about to die, then a statement that person makes right before he dies is also could be admitted over a hearsay objection. So he's saying that this is not a dying declaration because this wasn't made with impeding death on him, or if it was all planned. But still, he said we can still think about it through that lens. And he said, but generally speaking, a dying declaration comes in if it's a victim. If it's the victim of a crime that's being charged, then that's when that type of declaration can come in, even though it's a technically hearsay. So he said I would maybe use that as guidance to decide whether this type of statement should come in. But he said that it's not going to come in. So he did not allow that part of the testimony in. So all the jury knows right now is that Fotis was dead. That's all they know. They don't know what the manner and cause of death was. All they know is that Fotis is dead. So they don't know anything about anything else. Okay. So let's also now talk about one of the interesting experts that the defense put on in its case. And that was this memory expert, which was, I thought, very interesting. That was an interesting part of the trial to watch. This is a renowned expert. She's written a number of books about memory, and she's a professor currently in California. And she has been a professor since like 1970s or something. She's like a really, really acclaimed expert in this field. She's done hundreds of testings, and she's written papers, and she's given presentations. She's been hired by the FBI and the CIA. And I mean, she really, really is an acclaimed expert. And the reason for this, the reason why the defense wanted to bring this expert in was because if you look at some of the interviews that went on, there was some false information that was given to Michelle throughout the different interviews, and they also pressured her in different ways. They also convinced her that certain things happened, and they know certain things which maybe they didn't really know. And the memory expert was very interesting. She said that all of these tactics, that even though it's legal in Connecticut to use some of these tactics during an interrogation or an interview, it could actually alter the person's memory itself. So it's not just that if you get a policeman in the room with you or a detective in the room with you and he's telling you, I know this happened, I know this happened, I know this happened, you better tell me the truth. And then you finally put it out and say, okay, fine, I'll tell you the truth. This is what happened. It's not necessarily evidence that that's actually what you remember. You can be these memories can technically be forced into your head, and you can actually think that you remember something that you never really happened. It's a false memory. And given some, let's say, sleep deprivation, or under a stressed environment, or if you're told you're wrong a bunch of times during the interview, that, or inserting pressure for more details. If someone's pushing you, give me more details, give me more details, give me more. We know you know more. We know you know more information, and you're not telling it to us. Give us more details. And your memory really doesn't have more details, but you may then create details just to deal with that pressure. You'll create false memories of details to combat that type of pressure. And therefore, that's all she said. Now, what's interesting is that she specifically did not talk specifically about which situation or which memories in the Michelle Troconis interviews, the 3 interviews, which this could have happened. She didn't touch that. All she was talking about was the science behind it. And I think that was purposeful because the defense didn't want to open the door for the prosecution to start talking about all of the pieces of information that came out during the interview and which parts that perhaps that was not done in, and still they found lies in. So the defense specifically, I think on purpose, did not go into the specific pieces of information that Michelle offered during interviews, which could have been affected by these types of tactics that the detectives engaged in to create perhaps false memories of what happened during that interview. So that's also another part just to throw out there. Another part was that if someone's trying to pressure you and they're telling you they know something, and it's a person in authority. So it's a person like a police officer who's in an authority position, you'll just assume that they're right about something, and therefore you'll create a false memory as well. So that was, I think, a pretty decent witness for Michelle Troconis. Now, what was the cross-examination on this? And I thought the cross-examination was done very well. And part of the cross is that you, number one, is to show how she is so biased for the defense. She's been hired in something like 150 different criminal cases. And from all of those 150 different criminal cases, she was only retained, meaning hired. She was only hired by the state, the prosecutor, once. So for all that 150 times, she's always being hired by the defense to come and talk about the memories. And she even wrote a book. And in one of her books that she wrote, this came out in 1991, I think it was, she called it Witness for the Defense. And she's talking about herself, essentially. So the prosecutor brought this all out and said, you're so biased for the defense. You even wrote a book, Witness for the Defense. And you even said in that book that prosecutors don't like to see you, or the state doesn't like to see you testify in court. So also, he pointed out how much he's getting paid. And this is a normal tactic when you have an expert that's being hired by the other side. You want to find out how much they're getting paid. And it would also be helpful to find out how much they're getting paid in other cases as well. Certainly if it's for the same attorney or if it's for the same, always for the defense side. How often do you get, how much are your fees over the extent of a year? Just being an expert witness for the defense's side, how much do you get paid for that in total over the year? He didn't jump into that, but he did bring out that she was getting paid $600 an hour. Now her fee is $700 an hour, but since she agreed to charge the defense only $600 an hour, so that's why she kept to that rate, not to charge them anything more. So, you're getting paid all this money by the defense. And then he went through a number of very high-profile defendants where they were convicted of very serious crimes, and that she was actually hired to do work for them. So he's just painting her as this bought and paid for opinion. And that's a very good tactic. So when you're getting up in front of the jury, now, of course, if he had a memory expert to combat that, then it would be even better. But even now, he can get up and say, look, all of this expert is just completely a hired gun by the defense, and she just makes her living flying around different states only testifying for the defense's side. So that was in terms of that. And then also he also said that some of the testimony, some of the things that she said during the interview could not have been because of misinformation. And he went through a number of things that Michelle said in the first interview without being pressured, without giving any misinformation, without any sort of influence on her, and still she lied straight to their face. So that had nothing to do with any undue influence or misinformation that was being injected into the interview. That came out later. So those lies that you said in the beginning had nothing to do with any of what your testimony is about. Isn't that true? And she acknowledged that. Now, the defense closed this witness with just one question, which I thought was a decent question. But again, this argument is going to be very strong to the jury that she's bought and paid for. But the defense did say, would any of your testimony be different if you were hired by the prosecution? Meaning, who cares if I'm paying you? If the prosecution hired you and paid you this money for this interview, would any of your opinions change or not? And to that, she said, of course not, right? But there's a reason why the prosecution or the state never hires this witness, because it seems like she's always so bent to the defense. So that's really where we stand. There's been some other testimony, but that's really where we stand. There's going to be one other witness. I think it was one other witness possibly called tomorrow. And then we're going to move to closing arguments. So that's where we stand right now. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what the verdict is in this case. I don't think it's clear cut. I think the jury does have to work through some of this, put all the pieces together, and to decide that Michelle was actually part of this conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. So I don't think it's as clear as perhaps some other cases that we've been discussing. Certainly, like we spoke about, there is enough pieces of the puzzle to connect together to say that she is guilty of this. Again, there could be arguments made the other way. So this will be an interesting deliberation. I'd like to be in that jury deliberation room to see how they end up coming to the verdict. But it will be interesting. So that's where we are right now. That will be it for today. Please, if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like this video, and we will see you next time.